So some of you are like, well, why would this random person have a beekeeping class? My name is Gina. I'm the Floyd County Extension educator here. If you're not familiar with Floyd County, I'm down by Louisville. So I'm at the far eastern side of the state. And a couple of years ago, I say a couple, it's been actually 2014, because I started an extension in 2013. We had some local beekeepers and they said, hey, would you start some beginning beekeeping classes? At the time, obviously we didn't have COVID and it wasn't a big deal. And we started some in-person classes, had a lot of success, and got to the point that we also we have hives. They said, well, let's get some hives. So we actually have hives started at our office, and it kind of took off. Was not expecting it to do what it did, and we started out. We got grants. We have these hives, and we have a big day at our office in April called Pollinator Day, and all these people come and learn about pollinators, and it's really great. And so since we've all been kind of cooped up and not been able to see each other and do some of these things, I thought it would be nice to do a beginning beekeeping class again, maybe help some people out that maybe haven't kept bees and are interested, or maybe have had bees for a little while and aren't, just need some guidance. So that's kind of the plan today. So that hopefully, I'm watching one. I've got one person that's got an audio issue here, so I'm trying to help them out. And then I got one more set of numbers to give them. Okay. So that should take care of that. And because I am the only person, I thought I'd be a really cool educator and decided that I could run my meeting. I really didn't have any idea how many people would sign up. So again, if I look away, then it's just because I'm checking the chat, but please use the chat feature for questions and I will try to answer them as we go along. Chat, if you're unfamiliar with Zoom, is in the bottom toolbar. So if you hover down to the bottom, you will see it at the bottom. All right, we got Robert squared away. Yes, it's a good day. So I'm going to go ahead and gonna exit my chat there, and I'm going to start sharing my screen. Let's see, we're gonna optimize for video and share this. All right. See, the beauty of me doing this from my personal computer is that I can check to see what you see. And I think I need to do one more. Oh, I had it right the first time. Okay. We are good to go now. Let me pull my chat back up. So again, this is basic or beginner beekeeping basics. Some of this may be more beginner-ish than what you're used to. I was just trying to start from, what I would have wanted. When I started attending the beekeeping meetings in 2013, when I started, I got very, very confused because they were using terminology I had never heard of before. And so this was really new to me, and it took me a good 3 years, I feel like, to figure out what was going on. So let's see here. So the things to consider are maybe if it'll go, there we go. So why would we do this? Why would we keep bees? How much time does it take? What kind of money is involved with this? Where do you keep the bees, or what kind of location? And what about food sources? So these are things that we're going to kind of hit on as we're doing this. And our first one is the why. So people keep bees. Why? To get honey. They maybe want to help pollinate crops. Maybe it's extra income. Maybe it's a hobby. Maybe it's all the above. It could be a little bit of everything. Maybe it's not. Maybe there's something, a why up here that I haven't thought of, but these are the typical whys. Usually as people do it as a hobby, they like to have a little extra honey. And so it's a hobby that gives you, something in return. Usually though, that something in return is more than what you need, because a typical hive, you can get upwards of 80 pounds off a hive in a year. And I don't think any one person's going to consume 80 pounds of honey in 1 year. So it produces an opportunity to sell. You could give it away or you could sell it. And then the other benefit is to pollinate crops, which is also a moneymaker depending on the person and where you're located. So these are some of the whys. What about the time? So it isn't an everyday thing to keep bees, but it isn't a set it and forget it. I've had a couple instances. COVID was one of them. My hives are at my office. So my office is about 15 minutes from my house, which really isn't that far. But if I don't have to go into town, then I don't go. And so during COVID, when we were sent home to work from home, it became more difficult for me because I really had to be intentional with timing to go in there and care for the bees, because I can't just forget about them. So the next one is our money. So it's not a free hobby, so to speak. Some of it can be, but we have to have bees. So those cost money unless you catch swarms, which is a different class altogether. You have to get the hive. You've got to have food, which includes feeding jars and pollen and sugar and seeds. For flowers, you need your tools. You should have protective gear because I worked with some old school beekeepers and they never wore their gear. And it's their choice. It's everyone's choice whether or not you wear the gear. For me, I find it really important because it also protects me. Not that I'm allergic to bees, but I've been stung a couple of times where I have a reaction. And I've also got them caught in my hair. So for me, wearing the protective gear keeps the bees out of my hair, which is my preference. So then we're also thinking about our location. So hives have to face the south of the southeast, and that is so as the sun rises, that entrance will warm up first. And then the bees can get out a little sooner and go forage because they're not going to forage until it's about 55 degrees outside. We want to make sure our location has some shade, has a good windbreak, which is really more beneficial in the winter than anything else, especially in Indiana. And then there should be food and water sources nearby. So think about a honeybee only produces 1/12 of a teaspoon of honey in its lifetime. If they have to fly several miles to find food, that is going to hurt their production. Cornell has done a study and I think they tracked them where the honeybees were traveling up to 7 miles to get food. Well, that's great for that person that lives 7 miles from those hives, that they don't have to worry about their crops being pollinated. but it's taking away from what the bees can produce. So thinking about where those food and water sources are is really important. All right, our next one, this is, I said, I keep hives, and this is some of these, all these photos are really from my hives and how we got started. So location, we found a location. My location is fenced in because I'm in a town, and I did this to protect the bees from people, mainly because my area is not necessarily policed by anyone. And so I wanted to make sure that no one went in and bothered my bees. So it's really more protection from people than it is anything else, but it's also protection from other wildlife. So things like skunks will go in and try to get in a hive. And so this helps try to keep some of those other animals out. My area also has gravel in it. This was a thought at my time because I'm out in a grassy area. Oh, if we put gravel down, we won't have to mow. This will keep it nice and clean. There is a weed barrier down, and it did terrible, and the weeds, it doesn't look this nice anymore. Let's just put it that way. It doesn't look this nice. So thinking about your location, is it somewhere that you can keep kind of in a neat order so that you don't have to mow around the hives very frequently, because some bees get agitated by lawn mowers and string trimmers. So how do we make this area both amenable for the bees and easy for you to care for as the beekeeper? This is just another section of them put together. So they are facing pretty much due south, but this fence that I have also works as a windbreak, and the trees behind it work as a windbreak also in the winter. So they're facing the south, and that's the trees are in the west. Our next topic is our food. So we have to have carbohydrates, which would be nectar, and then we need protein, so the pollen. Those are the two things the bees need, and they come from flowers, but not all flowers, because honeybees cannot work all flowers. It has to depend on the flower shape and size. And you as the beekeeper could be providing this food. So what does this look like? Well, the flower in this photo is a sedum. Most people don't think about this. So if you don't like to water and want some drought resistant plants, sedums are great. And the bees really like it. Then you as the beekeeper could provide food. So this is my feeder jars inside my hive. You can see that they're just, mason jars, canning jars, whatever you want to call them, mayonnaise jars. And they have their lids that screw on. The lids have small holes poked in the top, and we fill these with sugar water, and we invert them and put them in the hive. Now there's a couple of different ways to feed the sugar, and that is through feeders like this, that are those jars. And then there's also like what's called like a inner hive feeder. So it looks like a frame, and it takes the place of a frame. There's a couple different ways to do that. You never want to feed your bees liquid food like on the front of the hive, like a Bordeaux feeder. If you're going to feed outside, then feed it away from your hives because you'll increase robbing. So if it's right outside the front of the hive, it will increase robbing, and we don't want that. So this is our inside feeding, keeps everybody nice and safe. It also, you want to feed a 1-to-1 ratio in the spring of sugar to water. Keeps it kind of thin and easy for the bees to work. In the fall, it's a 2-to-1 ratio of sugar to water. When it's thicker like that, it doesn't have as much moisture for the bees to have to take out. So in the fall, we want less moisture so that the bees can get it capped and get through the winter. Now, the other way that you would feed the bees is through, we were talking before the meeting started, a sugar patty, candy board, it goes by a couple different names. Some of the candy boards, they're literally like granulated sugar. You can put like a bee fondant in there, and you can put these in the hives in the fall to help the bees go through the winter months, so they don't, because they're not going to leave the hive. So you kind of have to provide the food for them. Even though you've left honey in the hive, this is a great way for them to get the food that they need to make it through the winter. Because even if you have, a hive full of honey, and the bees aren't able to go, oh, hey, everyone, shift an inch to the left for more honey. If it's not above them, then there's a high probability that they will starve to death, because they don't, some of them are not smart, but that's just not how they're wired to operate. It has to be above them. And this candy board, pollen padding stuff work well for that. So now onto the hive. All right. So what hive is best for you? This is now my bee yard. As I told you, the gravel didn't work near as well as I thought it would. But I have two different types of hives that I run. So a Langstroth, or what I call a standard hive, is that the one wrapped in a white with the yellow bungee cords around it and the brick on top of it. And then a top bar, which is my gray one. And it's not a traditional top bar. That is a hand-built top bar by a beekeeper down here that passed away a couple of years ago. And so it takes your deep frames. I have some issues with the way it's built, but this is also not a typical top bar hive. In terms of most top bars, their frames are slanted at the bottom. This one is not. You just take your deep frames and put them in there. The true top bar takes a different set of frames. There's also some different methods out there that we'll go into here in a second with the parts of the hive that you may find more useful to you than keeping hives like this. So the parts of the hive, we're going to go through these. So down here at the bottom is our stand and bottom board. This hive is different as it was all built as one. On most hives, it's two separate pieces. And the stand allows for the bees to have a landing pad. So it's really important. Now this ventilation box is really just an empty box. It may have a few frames in it, but the beekeeper that I learned from keeps an empty box down there, especially in the summer, to allow the bees some extra space. Because at max capacity, a bee colony has about 70,000 bees in it. Well, if it's 95 degrees in here, they're trying to keep the hive at a consistent temperature. The extra bees, like, to create the ventilation and to space the bees out, they have to go somewhere. So instead of, going on the front of the hive or bearding, what's called bearding somewhere else, this box allows them to hang out still within the hive, but just down below everything. Then we have the brood box. So this is hopefully where your queen's going to hang out and lay her eggs and, take care of the next generation. Then we have our deep super. And this looks odd, and it is. This was probably not our best option for the day we stacked these hives, because my deep super, how big that box is, really should have been down and been the brood box, because if it gets filled with honey and I have to move it, it can weigh 100 pounds or more depending on how full it is of honey. So putting it in the middle like that was not necessarily the smartest idea, but the theory behind it was, if I fill this deep super with honey, it's what's going to stay on for the winter. So I'm really not going to take it off anyway. But if I have to get down to the brood box to check something and I have to move it off, then I have a problem, because then I can't move it. There's a lot of things I can move, but a 100-pound box of honey is not one of them that I can do easily. So then these next boxes are honey supers. Those are the ones that we would take off as beekeepers and harvest the honey in June, July, August. And then the inner covers at the very top, and the piece that you can't see is the outer cover. This keeping bees gets very confusing. We have inner covers and outer covers and bottom boards and screen bottom boards and solid bottom boards. There's a lot of terminology. So just kind of keeping the basics of knowing your boxes can be called honey supers, which also they could, depending on the year, maybe they're not a honey super and maybe they're a brood box. Just depends on what order you grab them out of storage. So these are the main components. In the top bar, it looks different. So because you don't have all these boxes, you have the same kind of idea of your brood box or your brood chambers at the front of the hive, and then we go into honey storage. And you still can have inner covers in there to keep pests out, but you remove all the boxes and only have frames going from front to back. The next piece that's really important in your hive is having an entrance reducer. So you can see this is the day that this photo was taken, these bees were new, so they were still building up their numbers, and to keep that entrance reducer on helps them protect the hive. We take it off in the summer to allow for ventilation, but it's got about 3 different sizes on it, and it allows if you have it on the smallest size, it doesn't take near as many bees to guard that entrance as it does if you have the larger size or have it out. It also helps keep some other pests out, whether that's wasp, yellow jackets, maybe some mice. They sell other things to keep mice out of hives. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. The next one would be your frames. So with frames, and I'll cover this more in the second webinar, it's kind of a pitfall sometimes. You have to make sure that wherever you buy your boxes at is where you get your frames from, because not each company that sells beekeeping supplies makes it just enough different that they don't match up well, because there has to be what's called bee space in between the boxes and the frames, and it's about 1/4 of an inch. And some people put that bee space below the frames. Some of the companies put it above the frames. So it's really important as a beekeeper not to mix your frames and your boxes in between companies, because they won't match up well. So just keep that in mind as you're thinking frames. And the next thing that we have to consider is what bees are best for you. So there's many different varieties of bees. So there's Italians and Germans and Carniolan and Caucasian and Buckfast and Russian. These are our typical ones that we see on the market, and they all have their good qualities, and some have some maybe not the best qualities, but it depends on what you want as a beekeeper. So in my experience, the Italians, the Carniolans, and Caucasians are really calm bees, and they don't, they're not as aggressive. The Russians and Germans tend to be a little bit more aggressive. The Russians, though, tend to do better in a cooler climate. So before you buy bees, it's really a good idea to do your research to see which ones you want, with the caveat that you're still going to have a mixed bag of bees once that queen starts laying eggs, unless the only bees that were around that queen when she was mated, so if all the drones she mated with were Italians and she was an Italian, that's the only way you're going to get 100% Italian bees, because when the queen goes out to mate, she's mating with whatever drones she can find, and those drones, maybe she mates with 5 Russians and 5 Carniolans and 5 Germans. Well, then when her eggs start to hatch, that's what you're going to get back out. So for me, I really struggle when people say, oh, we have all Italians or we have all Carniolans or whatever, because it's kind of hard to say that. But what you can do is, and it is interesting to see this in the hive, as you're looking at your bees as they're going about, you can actually see the color variations that indicate the different types of honeybees, whether they're Italians or Germans or Carniolans. So in the photo, you can see that the Italian is really more of a gold, like a dark gold, versus a Carniolan, which is a lighter color. And you'll see the Russians and Germans are much darker. So it's really interesting to see that in the hive, but just know to say that you have a straight whatever, I think is very difficult. And my goal as a beekeeper, and I use mine for education, is to make sure I have very friendly bees. Doesn't always happen because bees become, agitated with weather and stuff, but I try to make sure that we have friendly bees because I don't want to be chased out of the hive like I have been a couple of times. And the next thing in the bees to think about is their life cycle. So when we're thinking about the bees and when we should feed and what's happening, we kind of have to know what their life cycle is. So when that queen lays worker eggs, from egg to adult takes 21 days. When she lays drone eggs, which we hope she doesn't lay a lot of because the drones don't do anything for the hive, they take from egg to adult 24 days. And the queen, if there's a new queen being made in that hive, from egg to adult takes 16 days. Because that hive can't be without a queen for very long before it becomes out of sync. So the queen takes the least amount of days, the drone takes the longest. With it taking the longest, that allows for some other pest issues to arise that we're not really going to cover today. But it's very interesting watching this life cycle take place. And I have a video later on that you can see some of the different stages. As they become an adult, well, they're only really alive, those workers are, for about 6 weeks. So they don't have a lot of time to get things done. And in that time, for the first, about 21 days or so, they are clean. They're in the hive and they're doing the jobs of cleaning. They're feeding larvae. They're feeding the young and the queen. After that first 21 days, they kind of switch to a new role. So as they get older and maybe aren't as, they're always useful in the hive, but they have to change their role, then they become field bees. And those field bees, they're the ones guarding the entrance of the hive. They're secreting wax, which is what these bees are doing here. They're fixing that frame. So they're secreting wax. They're building comb. They're working the nectar to get it to the right moisture content. And they're out foraging, because if that bee is 20 days old and it gets eaten by a bird when it's out foraging, okay, nothing's really been lost. But if it was a young bee that was only 10 days old, well, then we lost, a worker that we could have had for a few more weeks. So as they age, the bees go through these different jobs in the hive, which is really kind of interesting to think about. All right, so outside the jobs of the hive, now we're gonna switch gears. We were in the hive, now we're gonna go outside the hive and talk about a couple things. And the first one is gear. So I said, for me, I find it's really important that I have a veil on and a jacket, because I've gotten stung a couple of times, and I've also had about 10 bees get caught in my hair. And it's actually happened a couple of times, not the 10 bees, just getting a couple of bees caught in my hair, and it's really freaky. So I always find it really important to wear the jacket and the veil as a combo. In this photo, there's actually two different kinds. The far one is more of a flat-faced veil, as you can see. Works a lot better if you have a ball cap on underneath of it. And then the other one in the more towards the front of the photo is rounded. My beekeepers, again, everyone has their own preference. they kind of got on me for buying a bunch of the flat-faced ones because they're like, oh, well, the bees are going to fly at your face because they know that that's a sensitive area. And those flat ones, they'll be able to sting you through it because as they hit it, it will go towards your face, versus the round one, which is a little bit more structured at the front and they can't push it towards you as much. So thinking about what your safety gear is, you can also see one beekeeper has the thick, goat skin or leather gloves on. The other beekeeper doesn't. I go somewhere in between. I can, if it's a quick trip, I can usually go in the hive without gloves on. Usually though, I have nitrile gloves on. And it's because I learned this from my mentor in this. If I go in with nitrile gloves, I can feel the bees more than I can in those thick gloves. And I have a smaller risk of smashing bees with my hands if I've got those nitrile gloves on because I can feel them better. It doesn't mean that I'm not going to get stung through those gloves, but I have a better sensory for what's happening as the bees are walking around my fingers as I'm pulling up frames and moving hive parts around. So that's something to think about as you're getting your gear is, do you really need those thick gloves? Not that they're not important, but do you use something a little bit thinner so that you have a little bit more control and dexterity in the hive? And then thinking about gear, we have to think about cost because everything has a price to it. So these, and I did check these today just to see how accurate they were, and they're really not that far off. Bees would be about $130, and that would be for a package. So the photo in this slide is a package of bees. So that runs about $130. If you have friends that catch bees, they may catch you a swarm and not charge you anything. Or I know people that when they catch swarms, they see it as a moneymaker and they sell the swarms that they catch. So that bee cost really can vary. Jackets, veils, depends on what you want. The hive body with all the components, the frames inside, between $200 and $300, depends on what company you go with. Gloves, 15, a bee brush, a hive tool. You need a smoker, you need at least one feeder. Depends on, how much you need, how many feeders do you need? You really only need one smoker. You might want to get a couple hive tools because they do get lost, and paint them a bright color so you can find them when you set them on the ground. That's how they get lost. The bee brush is give and take. It depends on what you're doing. So all of this doesn't seem like a lot. And, it totals about $571. That's for one hive. What our suggestion always is to get 2 hives when you start, because if you only have 1 hive, you don't know how healthy that hive is because you have nothing to compare it to. But if you have 2 hives, then you have a comparison that you can go, hey, that hive's not making as much, it's not sealing off as much honey as this hive is. I wonder what's wrong, so that you can troubleshoot it. So technically, to get started, your total cost is probably going to be closer to $1,000 because you will need to get 2 hive bodies and you'll have to get 2 sets of bees. You'll have to get more feed and more jars. So think about, getting started is about $1,000, give or take. Next, honeybee care. So how do we go about caring for these bees when they can't always tell us what they need? And to start with, we're going to go through our checklist of water, food, consistent checking, and pest control. So for the water and food, which we kind of talked about earlier, you might not understand how that pollen patty and the sugar candy board works. This is my top bar hive. This is what we put in the winter. So I used window screening and literally just pretty much dropped it on there so that they could eat it. We put the covers back on them and they're fine. They can get to them as they need them. All right. Then consistent checking. It's really important to check your hives because if you don't open them, then you don't know, are there enough bees? Is the queen still there? Is she laying eggs? Do I have hive beetles? Do I have something else? Is there a mouse in there? So learning how to check your hive is important, not over checking it. So one of my friends told me she actually thinks that she killed her first hive by checking it too much because she was going in almost every day to check that hive. And that's a little much. Once a week would probably suffice, maybe once every 2 weeks. Because the more you go in that hive, the higher the chance you have of potentially smashing the queen if you're moving frames and taking off boxes and stuff. So you don't want to go in so frequently that it makes it uncomfortable for the bees and a higher risk of killing the queen. But you do want to consistently check it to make sure things aren't out of whack. Now, what you could do, this is Tony, and he was showing my first Beekeeping A to Z class kind of how to check the frame. These were brand new frames, so he's kind of telling them what's happening on the frame. A different way you could think about checking your bees, not that you have to do this, and this is not something that I do, but it is a way to see what's happening in the hive, is set a camera out there. Had a GoPro, I set it out there, and it allowed me to make sure that the bees were coming and going, because that's really what I need to know. As long as the bees are coming and going, that means they're finding food. If I don't see activity at the front of the hive, then I know that something's wrong and maybe I don't have bees anymore. So you can set, again, this was just a day we were doing stuff out there, and I threw the camera up and said, well, let's get some video of the bees flying around and stuff. But it's a different way to check it. So depending on where your bees are at, maybe you want to set a trail cam out there, and every, couple of days, check it, make sure they're doing okay, especially maybe if you're going on vacation or something like that and you can remote in. That would be an easy way to check your bees. All right. And the next one is to know what is normal for your hive. For me, this is normal for my hive. This is what's called bearding. It was a very hot day, too hot for all the bees to be inside the hive. So they hung out on the front of the hive. Tends to freak out a lot of the people in my beginning class because they have never seen this happen before. They think the bees are swarming. These bees are not swarming. They are just hanging out to get cooled off because it's too warm in the hive. So we have to know what's normal because each hive has its own personality. And with that personality, in the top left photo, again, it's my top bar, and we really struggled with this hive because they kept building comb, like they wanted to build comb, which was great, but they were doing weird things. So we had to do something a little different with them to help kind of control the comb building so that we could still use the frames and stuff. And we had to do what's called checkerboarding. So checkerboarding is putting in a frame with foundation and then a frame without foundation, and kind of doing that. And I do it towards the back of the hive, and it keeps the bees from building below the bottom of the frame, because this hive has the personality of they just want to build, and so they're going to build comb wherever they can find space. When I do the checkerboarding, it gives them a whole blank canvas. It gives them about 5 frames of blank canvases, and they're happy with that. And then they start building on the bottom of the frames, and it's wonderful. Other hives have a tendency to make a lot of queen cells. That's what the photo on the right is. Those two kind of bullet-shaped objects are queen cells. Now, most hives will have at least 1 or 2 of these because they're emergency cells. So the bees are going to make them on the off chance something terrible happens to the queen and she can no longer perform her duties. But we do have hives that tend to build a lot of queen cells, and that you have to know what's normal and what's not normal. Because if you're seeing queen cells and they look like they're being capped and stuff, that tells you either your queen's gone or they're trying to, she's not doing her job, so they're going to get a new queen. And then that means that some of them may leave. So you have to, again, know what's normal for your hive. And learn how to check a frame. So during this class, we were looking at the frames. You actually check your frame in what's called a Z pattern. And I'm going to pause it so that you can see. So as we're checking the frames, we're looking for larvae. And you can see if I'm going to try to get my annotate up here so that I can show you. Here's a larvae here. And then let's see here. You can kind of see a little line here. This is an egg. I got to turn my annotate off so that I can keep us going here. So I'm going to pause it here in just a second again. And when you're checking frames, this is what you're looking for. You're checking for larvae. You're not always looking for the queen, but you're looking to make sure that you have those. Oh, it didn't pause like I wanted. Hold on. Let me get us back here. So if we're looking for the eggs, then we know the queen is still there. Oh, it doesn't like me now. And so looking for those eggs, we know the queen's there, and it's really hard to see. So you actually have to have the sun behind you, like shining down on the frame so you can see those little eggs, because they're just so clear and small. They're like a little piece of rice, and they're very hard to see. So that's what we're doing when we're checking the frames. On occasion, you should probably check for your queen. And sometimes there's kind of a cheater way to check for your queen. My queen is right here in the center with the blue dot. So let me point this out again. Right here is my queen. And she has a blue dot on her. You can buy queens that are marked. You can buy marking pins to mark your queen. If you've got a quick hand and the right tools, you can do that. Usually she's pretty easy to spot because she is the biggest bee in the bunch. And if you can find her, then you know she's still there, especially if you're questioning if she's still laying eggs or laying enough eggs. So that's why we would check for the queen. And it's really kind of funny. I by no means do I say that I'm trained to find every queen or whatever. I tend to find them by accident. We will go in looking for them, and a beekeeper is one of my friends, he'll go through and he'll pick up the frames and he'd be like, nope, she's not here. I'm like, stop. She's right there. You're going to smash her if you don't slow down. And I tend to find them strictly by accident because she is so much different than the other bees. I used a blue pin to mark my queen. There's actually a color scheme. So each year is assigned a different color so that you know, if it's a white queen and white was assigned in 2020 for the queens, and you go a couple of years and they've assigned blue to 2021 and green to 2022 and red to 2023. Okay, well, now we're back to white, and it's probably time to replace that queen because she's really only good for 2 to 3 years. So that's also where the marking becomes important. I don't follow the color scheme because I'm not looking really to replace queens. I really hope that my hives really just survive. But you do, if you're doing a lot of mass production, want to make sure that you mark them and you keep track of which queen is which color so you know when to replace them. Oh, it's going to be slow. Oh, there's my queen. I knew I had an arrow. So the other thing to do is learn about pest of the hive. This is a picture of my bottom board. So I have a bottom board that comes out, and I can take it and I can look across it and I can see if I see a lot of pest from the hive, would be small hive beetle, things like that. Or I can check to see, what else is going on. A lot of this stuff is pollen that has fallen out of the frames. Somehow there's rocks in there. I have no idea how the bees get rocks in their hive, but they tend to have rocks, and I never have figured out how that happens. Next is, learning the pest and stuff, doing mite counts. So what does a mite count look like? Mites are varroa mites. The biggest issue we probably have with bees is keeping these under control. So this is actually a photo looking up at the mites and doing that. So learning how to deal with those pests. Other pests would be mice. I've dealt with that. Yellow jackets we talked about earlier, because wasps, they're carnivorous, so they can actually, if they want to steal some of your honeybees so that they can feed them to their young. So learning about those different pests and how to control them. And the question is, how do you learn this? Well, you kind of taken the first step tonight. You've attended classes, you've educated yourself. There's local bee meetings. So there's beekeeping chapters or clubs all across the state. You can find them by checking out the Beekeepers of Indiana website, indianabeekeeper.com. And if you're really interested and haven't, you want to learn more and you're like, do I get bees, or I'm getting bees next spring and I still need to learn more, checking out that Beekeepers of Indiana website is really important, because they do a spring workshop. It happens the last Saturday of February. It's called Bee School. And they have a beginner track, and it's really important to, you can go to that track and, you're learning from other new beekeepers, and they're going to ask questions. Maybe they have different questions than you do, or maybe you all have the same questions, and it allows you to learn from each other, and then also interact with seasoned beekeepers. Then you have the Bee Health Extension website, and again, another great resource. Really, when we're looking for resources, we want to make sure that, they're research-based and stuff. Sometimes you hear of people going to other, you can go to YouTube and stuff. There is good stuff on YouTube, but also take it with a grain of salt, because a lot of those beekeepers on YouTube are probably not from the same climate you are. So there's a gentleman from Georgia that people like to watch. It's not that he's a bad beekeeper. It's just, you have to keep in mind, Georgia's climate's very different than Indiana, and he's going to keep bees a little bit differently. Just like if you were to follow a beekeeper in Florida or Texas, for the most part, they're warm all year and don't have to worry about winterizing their hives. So things to keep in mind when doing that. There's several great books out there to read that have great pictures to really show you what, kind of answering some of those beginner basic questions. The next thing would be to find a friend. I work with a lot of beekeepers, and they're my friends, and they come and they help me because I can't do it all. Those boxes get very heavy, and the frames get very heavy if you have to pull out a lot of them, and it's 2 hands just aren't always enough. 2 hands are great when we're doing the food and stuff, but usually 4 hands are better. Sometimes even 6 if you've got one smoking, you've got one moving bees, you've got one, doing something else. Every time that we harvest honey, when we go out to get the frames, it takes at least 3 of us. 2 of them are getting the frames out and trying to get the bees off. The other one is manning the cooler or the tote that the frames are going in to shut it as quickly as possible so that the bees don't go in the tote with the frames. So finding a friend or 2 really helps, especially if you're learning and you feel unsure of yourself. It's great to have a friend to bounce ideas off of, and to pick their brain. The other one is know the laws. John Schellenberger, who is on the state bee association, he's from down here. He worked really hard with the legislator to make sure that bees can be kept in all municipalities in Indiana, whether that's a town, city, county, whatever. You can keep bees in any municipality. They can't tell you no. What they can tell you is that they would maybe only allow you to have one hive at your house, which is totally within reason, because they don't want someone maybe on a small 800 square foot lot having 5 hives. That's a lot inside a city to have that. Not that the bees are a problem, but it just is a lot on the neighbors may not appreciate if there's, that many hives there and stuff. And so it's always important to check where you live at to see how many they will allow you to have. Maybe they don't care, and that's awesome. Now, this is not true for subdivisions. Subdivisions, HOAs, they can tell you that you can't keep bees there. So regardless of what the municipality, you live out in the county or whatever, if whatever those subdivision rules are, you have to follow. And if they say you can't keep bees, then you can't keep bees there. That doesn't mean that you can't find a friend and keep bees on someone else's property. It just means they can't be at your house. If you do have bees at your house and stuff, or really anywhere, it's always good to talk to the neighbors to let them know what you're doing. And sometimes it's even nice to take them a jar of honey at the end of the season so that they feel like they got something out of it if they're allowing you to keep bees on their property. Again, it's not a law that you give them honey, it's just a nice gesture. And really the most important thing is to have fun keeping bees. So this is a video, I get calls all the time from places that have swarms, because we always encourage people, if you see a swarm, please call the extension office and let us help, find a beekeeper that can come and get that swarm so that they're safe. And people really do want to save the swarms. And this, I got a call, I was at the office, and I am a swarm catcher, not that I'm just not a swarm catcher at all. And called my mentor and said, hey, there's a swarm just down the road from the office. He's like, cool, let's go get it. You can't see me in this photo because I'm the cameraman. I apologize. My camera skills were not great that day, because he handed me his phone also and said, here, record this for my family so they can see what I do. And he gave me a hard time because I was dressed in my heels and my dress slacks going out to catch these bees. And you'll see that he actually doesn't have any protective gear on. And that's because when we're catching swarms, they're very docile. So they have kept, when they left their home, they filled their honey crop with honey, and they are, they don't want to lose that honey. So they're very docile. They're not stinging. They don't have a home to protect. So they're really not hard to work with. This swarm was very interesting though. You can kind of see where his hand is. There's actually a little bit of comb there. They had actually been there for over 3 days and had started to make a home inside this shrub. So they were actually probably a little bit more, they should have been more aggressive than what they were. I'll put it that way, but they were not. So you can see he's going to cut the branch out. He's going to drop it in the box, but it's fun. So you get to hang out with these people and go do, you get those strangest stories when you talk to beekeepers about, well, here's how I got this swarm, or here's how I did this. How did you get these out of these bricks? So it's really interesting to partake in. And that is kind of my slideshow. So let me end this here so that I can see. Let me stop share here. There. All right. Let me pull up your questions here so that I can answer them. So robbing, Allison asked, what is robbing? And it's really other bees coming in. So if you have a very weak hive, so one, maybe it's really not at capacity, other honeybees will actually find it because they'll smell the honey and they will come in and steal from it. So that's what's called robbing, is other honeybees come and say, well, you all kind of aren't great at keeping your hive up, so we're just going to take the work that you did and go use it for ourselves. Because if they're stealing honey that's already been, the moisture's been reduced, they don't have to reduce the moisture in it. They can just take it and put it in their own hive, and well, life is good. So the wasp don't steal the honey. Well, they'll go in and they'll eat some of it, but the wasp are really going in to take bees to feed their young. So wasps are carnivorous, and they will go in and take bees. Yellow jackets will go in, especially if you're feeding inside the hive, and take sugar water and everything. So I don't think that there is an ideal distance, Shelley, on keeping a hive from another house or a neighborhood. You can really keep them anywhere. You just have to make sure that they have enough flight path to get up and over if there's an obstacle in their way. So I have that vinyl fence. So they can't fly through the vinyl fence. They have to fly up and above it. So mine are back probably 10 feet or so. So they have plenty of space to get off the landing board and up into the air to go find food. All right. Oh, yeah, no, Shelley, you also asked about, can there be two queens at the same time? No, there can only be one queen bee in a hive at a time. Otherwise, it goes very, very wrong. And actually what will happen is, let's say that you're trying to requeen the hive and you're forcing those bees to make a queen. Let's say they've got 3 queen cells that they've been nurturing and stuff to turn these eggs into queens. Well, one of the, they're all about to emerge at the same time. Whichever the first one is to emerge, she will go around and she will sting the other queen cells. That way they cannot emerge, because you can only have one queen. So if they're making their own queen, you have to watch for that. If you're really good at keeping bees, which this is an advanced topic that I'm not even very versed in, you can do cutouts and you can cut that queen out and take her and put her somewhere else and let another set of bees have her. But that's an advanced topic. But yes, we only want one queen in there, which is also why it's important to check to see if she's still there. This year I had a hive. I knew I needed to requeen it last year. With COVID, we didn't get to it. We didn't force them to make a new queen and stuff. They were going gangbusters this spring, didn't think much about it. Got out there, like, something's wrong with this hive about midsummer. Something's really wrong. The queen we thought was gone, which she still was. Whether she died, she left, don't know. But we had a worker trying to take over the place of the queen. That doesn't work, because workers, if they're laying workers, only lay drones. So they only lay males. So we cannot have a laying worker in a hive, because it does nothing for the hive, because the drones do nothing for the hive except eat the food. Sorry guys, it's nothing against you all. It's just that's how the hive works, is the males just eat what's there and take up space. All right. Yeah, so let's see. Deanne said that, yes, there can be 2 within a single hive at the same time. She's never seen it, but it's probably more, it can happen, but it's really not good. Well, and every bee that the queen lays is her son/daughter. And so we don't want a mother-daughter, unlike in human life where we can all pretty much coincide, mothers, daughters. It doesn't work well in the hive. So yes, Angie asked, would you need a queen in each box/hive? Yes, so each box has to have a queen, and that queen is important to that hive because she gives off a pheromone. So she gives off a scent, and that lets all of the workers, so her sons and daughters, know, hey, this is where we live at. And if she were to die and that pheromone starts to fade, that's when the signals go off going, oh, we have a problem. Where's our leader at? So each hive has a queen. Sometimes you can split hives and do other things and leave one queenless for a little while to force a queen. That's beyond basics. It's like a basics 2.1 class we'll go with, or 201 class, not a beginning level. Yes, so Robert put in there that Clark County has a bee club. So if you live in Charlestown, Clark County has a bee club. I think they meet the third Wednesday of the month. I don't remember if they do if they meet in the winter or not. Floyd County has a bee club called Spring Valley Beekeepers. They meet the first Monday of the month, but we don't meet from November through February. But if you get on the Indiana Beekeepers website, you can actually find all the clubs for Indiana and contact them to see when they meet. So is there an ideal time of the year to try to establish a hive? Yes, it is the spring. So if you're thinking about getting bees, you need to order for next year, you need to order your bees now and get all your equipment now. If you wait and try to order it in like January, February, you might not get them. So when we order bees, for the most part, bees are coming from the south. So Florida, Georgia, Texas, and then they're shipped up here. I will tell you from not my experience, but from other beekeeper stories, the postal system does not appreciate bees arriving at their office. It freaks them out and they call you very promptly and say, your package is here and you must come get it now. They do not deliver these to your house. You must come get them if you buy a package or a nuke. And have it mailed to you via UPS or via the postal system. You can find people locally that will sell nukes or packages to you. Let's see, I'm going to draw a blank up a Bedford Bee Club. They have someone that sells packages and stuff. Again, if you know people, they will give you swarms or they'll sell you swarms. That's how I've gotten a few of mine is they're like, hey, yeah, you're doing education. We caught 20 swarms this year. Just take one. It's fine. We don't need it. I think my folks try to keep they think it's a competition to see who can catch the most swarms each year. You know, I think someone was up in like 57 range of catching swarms. But that's a great way to get bees and get that hive established in the spring. If they're new bees, you still have to feed them, even though there's lots of flowers and stuff, you still need to feed them when you first get them, that, 1-to-1 ratio, unless the temperature is below, 32, because that 1-to-1 sugar ratio isn't enough sugar to keep it from freezing. So we can only feed liquid stuff when it's not going to freeze in the hive. And that's kind of, when we want to establish it. Earlier, before we started, someone said, oh yeah, I got a swarm in, just a couple months ago in like September. And there's actually like a little saying like the swarms in May and June are good. The ones in the fall are not as necessarily as good because they don't have time to build up their hive and get a good food reserve. So you really have to feed anything that you get in the fall. You have to feed very heavy so they can store enough to get through the winter, because they need probably between 50 and 80 pounds of honey to make it through our winters here in Indiana. So that's kind of the plan. Does anyone have any other questions? Feel free to unmute and ask me. I tried to keep us, I'm 8:05, not too bad for the first time around with this. So any questions, again, you can drop them in the chat or you can unmute now that I can see all of my screens at once. You're welcome to unmute and ask me questions. So I do have this recorded. I will get it out to you, a link tomorrow, and there'll be a short survey with it also.
I've got a question.
Sure, ask away.
We have a hive facing the west.
Uh-huh.
There's a building blocking the north.
Okay.
But the entrance is actually facing the west. Should we leave it where it is, or is now the time to move it? There would be a place to have it going facing the south.
So you can, if you can rotate it towards the south, that's a little bit better. All you have to do at night, make sure your entrance reducer is in there where they can't fly out, and just rotate it. Just fix that orientation on it so that it's facing more south. And then just take the entrance reducer off. And when they come out to do their orientation flight, then they'll figure it out. Now, if you were to do it in the middle of the day, like let's say it's 75 degrees outside and they were constantly flying in and out because it's June, and you were to change it in the middle of the day, that would mess them up completely. You have to do it when it's all closed up. That way, when they go out to do the orientation flight every day, that they can figure out where to come in at.
Actually, what we would have to do, there is already a hive directly to the south. So if
Oh,
we turned it toward the south, it'd be the back of the other hive. It'd be too close.
yeah.
So should we just leave it for the winter?
Yeah, you can just leave it then, yeah. I mean, if
Okay.
it's working for your bees and it worked okay this year, I mean, there's nothing that says you absolutely have to move it. It's just to get them out of the hive sooner. It's better if that entrance faces the south to southeast so it warms up earlier in the morning.
Okay. I was, all of our, we have 3 hives. They're all first year hives. 2 were
Mhm.
packages and one's a swarm. And the ones, this was the swarm, a local swarm. It's the one facing west. I was just thinking about getting it through the winter, but
Mhm.
it did fine this summer. It did
Oh, okay,
absolutely
yeah.
fine. So,
Yeah,
okay.
usually that's as a beekeeper, that's all we can hope for is to get hives through the winter. So good
Yeah.
luck to you. You know, I don't know. A part of me, and this is how, you know, each beekeeper, you can ask 10 beekeepers the same question and you're going to get like 20 different answers. And how they manage. So it's all about what management styles work best for you. For me, I have one hive now going into winter. If it dies this winter, it dies this winter. And that's okay with me because I have a lot of frames that are damaged in it. And I have a hard time correcting that when there's a bunch of bees in there. So if my hive dies, then I can go back in and fix those frames and then start again with some fresh bees.
Okay. Yeah.
All right.
Thank
Any
you.
other? Yeah, no problem. Um, So Sharon asked, when you catch a swarm in the spring, how long do you feed a 1-to-1? Definitely through at least May. Some people will feed all year up until the fall, that 1-to-1. It depends on how many floral sources are around for the bees to go through. So, and I've actually lost some hives because I didn't feed in the middle of the summer. We hit a drought and there weren't a lot of flowers blooming. And I didn't think about it at the time. And then they started eating their honey reserves. And I should have been feeding them in like July, that 1-to-1 ratio. So just it really depends on what your flower source looks like in July. Okay. Well, if there's more questions, please ask them. I'll stay on for, you know, until I blocked my calendar to 8:30. So I'll stay on till 8:30, or you're welcome to log off and I'll get a link out to you all tomorrow. All right, Sharon, you asked, do you put anything besides sugar in your winter candy boards? You can put a little bit of vinegar in there to keep them from molding. And I also put a little bit of a pollen patty in there so they have both their carbohydrate and their protein source. So, all right. It's the last question I see in there. Any other questions? Not, you're welcome to log off and we'll talk to everybody later.